Welcome, welcome, everyone. Yay, this is amazing. There's so many of us here. Wow. All right, let's get to it. We still have people coming in, but I'll go ahead and let them in as they come. So wonderful. All right, first of all, thank you to everyone here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being open to doing this work. Thank you. Thank you just all around to our panelists, to our participants. This is so huge for me. This is definitely the biggest live event that I've ever done. And so I appreciate your patience and your openness to all of this. So let me introduce myself. My name is Alessandra Milena Gastaldello, and I was born in Peru. I am a white passing woman of color, and I had the privilege of having a really wonderful upbringing and so much education. I grew up here in South Florida, in Naples, on Calusa Seminole territories. And I am now currently splitting my time between here and our farm in Colorado. It's in southern Colorado on Ute Cheyenne territory. I have a homestead. We farm cannabis, hemp, and I have two boys, Ivan and Rafe, and they're wonderful. And so, yeah, my line of work, I'm a ceremonialist. I love to hold space. I love also working with plants, obviously cannabis, hemp. And yeah, I'm just so honored to be here today. So thank you for joining me. We're going to go ahead and just take off. So before anything, I just want to let you know the flow of the event. We're going to have different panelists speaking. It's going to be about 15 minutes lots per panelist. And then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So if you would like to go ahead and in the chat, write any questions that you may have, we'll see how much time we have at the end to get to them. So to begin, I want to just define a few words just so we're all kind of on the same page. And I know that there's more definitions than just these, but these were the ones that Google brought to me and I just quickly wrote down so we could all have a good frame of reference here. So decolonization, once viewed as a formal process of handing over the instruments of government, is now recognized as a long-term process involving the bureaucratic, cultural, linguistic, and psychological divesting of colonial power. Cultural appropriation, a term used to describe the taking over of creative or artistic forms, themes, or practices by one cultural group from another. It is in general used to describe when Western appropriations of non-Western or non-white forms and carries connotations of exploitation and dominance. Indigenization recognizes a validity of Indigenous worldviews, knowledge, and perspectives, opportunities for it to be expressed, and incorporates Indigenous ways of knowing and doing. Indigenization requires non-Indigenous people to be aware of Indigenous worldviews and to respect that those worldviews are equal to other views. Indigenization is about incorporating Indigenous worldviews, knowledge, and perspectives into the education system, right from primary grades to universities. So we'll go ahead and start with that. And now I want to welcome Marilu Shinn, Mujer Medicina on Instagram. I'm going to go ahead and begin with you, sister. So let me find you here. If you could just unmute yourself, Marilu, if you're here. Let me see. No, not yet, maybe. Okay, well, that's fine. We can definitely start with another panelist. Let me see here. Let me check my phone, make sure. All right. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and move on until the next panelist. One more chance here. Okay, wonderful. That's okay. We'll move on to the next panelist. I know that there's some people still flowing in. Mariah, Medicine Collective, are you here? I saw a funny meme one time. It was like being on a Zoom call is like being on a seance, Just like, are you here? I can hear you. Are you there? Can't see you. Okay, well, let's go ahead and see if Mariah, if you're not present yet, that's okay. Let me go ahead and move on to the next panelist, which would be Meesha, Alchemistic Studios. Are you here, sister? I know some.
I am. Hello, 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 hello.
Okay, okay, let me find you. Yes, wonderful. There you are, sister. Let me pin you up. There we go. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Oh, great. So we're both on here. I think you can change your view. So you can have speaker or gallery view. And so right now I have both of us pinned. So yay. Thank you so much, Meesha, for joining us. I'm so happy to have you. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. So Meesha is a first generation queer Indian Desi woman living on Taino land. Her partner and her tend to the farm they currently care for and all of their animal companions. She works as a yoga studio owner, a social justice activist, and a spiritual seeker. So
that's me.
yay, awesome. So yeah, thank you for joining us. Her Instagram is Alchemistic Studios if you want to find her and follow her. So we'll just go ahead and begin. So the yoga industry is worth well over 88 billion. I looked that up today worldwide and is expected to reach 215 billion by 2025. That's a compound annual growth of 11.7%. And that's just the studios. Once you account for retreats, clothing, mats, blocks, and other accessories, the global yoga market is worth well over $130 billion. With the yoga industry raking in this much money a year, we could say that yoga is probably the most commonly appropriated industry right now. Meesha, you are a Desi woman who has been practicing yoga for 9 years and teaching for 6. Are you willing to share more about what it is like to be a BIPOC Desi woman identifying with the she, they pronouns living in the yoga world today?
Yes, first of all, I just want to say I am so nervous. There's so many of us. So I'm going to take a big breath in. I invite everyone to take just a big breath in through their nose, fill the whole body. Exhale out the mouth. Just drop in. I just need to arrive here with all the nerves. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I am so honored to speak to this. You mentioned lots of billions of dollars, and the first thing that came to my mind was like, and there's still, hungry and homeless people, which is wild. And that kind of transitions me into the first part of my answer, which is like, what do I think about this, right? What does this mean to me? The first thing that I think of is how many yoga teacher friends that I've had that cannot make ends meet. And so yoga has been part of capitalism now. It's been colonized, it's been capitalized, it's been commodified, it's been turned into a brand, into an industry. And yet somehow the folks that spend thousands of dollars getting certified and giving this gift to us, the people that we really go to at the end of a hard day to process our trauma, to find relaxation, to learn the art of yoga, aren't compensated properly at all. They're told that it's just a side hustle or it's a hobby. And so it makes you wonder, where is all this money going, right? You said multi-billions of dollars are being generated in this machine. And just like capitalism always is, the money is going to the top, and the top is usually white men that own corporate yoga studios, or it is one woman who maybe already had some wealth to open up a studio space, and then the rest of the teachers go without. It's also in the merch. It's in this like commodification of it. And so that part bothers me. And then there's the other part, of course, which is cultural appropriation, which is taking an ancient medicine and turning it into something that's digestible in the West, or in a market in which it can be taken in by people who maybe would be scared of it as a spiritual practice. Maybe they would be scared of it as a brown person's lineage. And so it's been turned into this kind of like white fitness thing, which, as someone who comes from an Indian background, is confusing, and it's also kind of disrespectful. This is like a second colonization of India, right? The British came in the first time, and they took and they took, and they dismantled a lot of ancient systems that were in place. And then it was brought to America, kind of like the 60s really ramped up Indian culture in America, and now it's been turned into a commodity. So it's like this double colonization. And that's how I see the yoga industry.
Yes. Wow. Thank you, sister. That's really powerful. I really hear what you're saying. I also want to ask you about really like the reason why what like empowered me into this talk was I was sharing with you about you know, I'm freshly down here in Naples, and this work is not yet really prevalent here. Most people have no idea what I'm talking about or get really offended when I start to speak about these things. And I was invited, as I shared with you, to a kirtan led by all white women for white people. And, you know, I began to question that in a really respectful way. I declined, and I reached out to you, asking if you had any sources or references, or if you had any of your own content that I could like send forward, and then of course compensate you for your time and energy. And so yeah, that was really what like triggered me so much. And your words were so powerful. Like you really helped me alchemize all of that anger into empowerment to move forward and actually put together this panel. So I would love for you to speak about how I love like your very positive outlook on all of this, and how you really take all of these triggers and alchemize them into empowerment. And what has that looked like for you?
Sure. I'm so honored to have crossed paths with you, and that this is like what has been birthed. It's so special and powerful. What I would first say is it doesn't go straight like trigger to empowerment. Like I too get really pissed off in certain scenarios and certain patterning that is happening in this paradigm that we live in. And it does trigger me at first and make me feel upset. And that's because I have been made to feel second class in spaces that are using my heritage and my inner knowing to exist and to make money and to have a persona. And so it triggers some kind of like complex in me in which, you know, the assimilation like trigger comes up and all kinds of things. What I do from that point is usually first I sit with it and I really try to put words to like, what is happening? Why am I upset? But then ultimately I know it's my job to speak up about this in an empowered way and come out the other end, because if I don't, then there are folks out there with less resources or who have maybe spent less time understanding like decolonization and understanding that there's another way that we can be doing this, who are still being oppressed within these systems, who are still being triggered themselves and don't feel like they have a voice. If I have the knowledge and I have the ability and like the platform to transmute this into a message, to reach more people and kind of turn this into like a way that we can come together as a community and rise and address it, then maybe I will have kept one more person from feeling like really alone in this, or like they don't have words to put to that feeling, because it's legitimate. It's legitimate to feel triggered in scenarios where someone is selling cacao for thousands of dollars in a retreat as an Indigenous person. That is your sacred right to feel enraged by that or hurt by that. And so I just want to make that like known, basically.
Yeah, thank you. That's so true and so powerful. Yeah, nowadays, you know, we see things like kirtan, mantras, mala beads, Buddha statues, Tibetan prayer flags, you know, the beautiful Desi Indian pants, Kuan Yin statues. I mean, let's be real, this stuff is everywhere. And I know I was shocked, and I had to shed so much when I first tapped into this. So what are your thoughts on non-natives, not just practicing yoga, but teaching or having a studio, hosting kirtans? I feel like there's a difference between the participation aspect and then like where you're actually charging money or profiting off of this. So like, what is your edge with this cultural appropriation within the yoga space? Like, what do you think is okay? Yeah, what does that look like for you?
Sure. First of all, I want to acknowledge that you took like accountability that there were things that you had to change when you started tapping into the ideas of decolonizing and cultural appropriation. Same, like there were items that I had, whether it was a dream catcher or ideologies I had that I had to dismantle and rebuild. And I want to invite everyone hearing this to know that like all of us have done this. We've all participated in this. It's hard not to when it's so normalized. And so we can all just, you know, tweak and learn and grow and evolve. And there's no shame in this. That's not why we bring it up. It's so we can all kind of evolve together. And second of all, what was it? Oh, yes, teaching for making money versus kind of being inspired. So it's like cultural appropriation versus appreciation. Mm-hmm. I have met folks that aren't Indian that I can feel off them that they went to India and they were inspired by some kind of essence that lives there. In the same way I was when I first went, when I was 11, 12 years old. Like they were inspired by the culture, the music, the smells, the fabrics, the yoga, and they carry it with them. I love that. I think traveling and learning about different cultures is how we expand our mind, and it's super important, especially in a world that's so global. Where I do draw the line though is when they take it and they make it their kind of persona and their now business to be profiting off of, as if they are kind of like a master of it, or that it's their lineage to share with the world. The reason being because of the systems in place. It may seem little to someone, but then they're feeding into this industry that we just talked about, this billion-dollar industry that is run by thin, able-bodied, straight, white, pretty women, you know, like with all this privilege already, and then they're taking and they're recommodifying. And that's where I draw the line. I don't think there's anything wrong with loving yoga, but let's kind of start to uplift BIPOC voices. Let's start to have South Asians on Yoga Journal. There's so many Indian yoga teachers. Like, it's not that they're not out there, it's that they're not showcased. So that's where the reparations come in. And that's my opinion too. Like, I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but I've thought a lot about it.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure most studios are owned by probably white women or men across the country. What would you say to them? Because maybe they're hearing this and they're like, oh my gosh, that's me. What would you say to like white studio owners? How can they make this right?
There's a lot of ways. I mean, it depends how kind of deeply you want to do that work. I would start with get some teachers in that aren't white, get teachers in that are South Asian, learn about the culture, the roots of it, not the new age repackaged version of yoga that keeps feeding into like some scary stuff, you know? Learn the roots of it and really appreciate the history of it. That's one step. The second, you know, hire teachers of different backgrounds that can bring their lineage to the studio. And then, you know, maybe create scholarships for disabled BIPOC Indian folks. You know, how can you get your students looking different too? Like, how can we make these studios reflect the real world, not this bubble of privilege? And I've had a really beautiful person. Sorry?
Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just said, you mentioned reparations too.
Yeah. And I was going to talk about, I have a friend who was teaching yoga. She stepped down, or they stepped down rather, and sent me all the books that they have from India. And they're so talented in so many ways. At first, it kind of like, you have to unidentify and start to strip away this like identification you have as a yoga teacher. And now like they do art full time, they do all these other things, and they don't teach yoga and feel good about it. Feel good that they gave me resources to uplift my voice. And that's beautiful. And I don't expect everyone to do that, but it's a thing, you know, it's a thing. We can uplift and send resources to BIPOC people.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your presence here. Thank you, sister. We're gonna go ahead and move on to the next panelist, which is Marilu Shinn, Mujer Medicine. So, Marilu, if you're here, if you could please unmute yourself and begin to um, maybe talk so it like finds you, or I found you.
Hi, everyone.
Oh,
Thank you for being here. Can
yeah,
you hear me well?
I can. Let me go ahead and pin you. Make
Okay, beautiful.
add pin. There we are. Hola. Okay, wonderful.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. Beautiful. Okay, Marilu Shinn was born and raised in the lands we know as Mexico, in Mexico City, Anahuac, heart of the Aztec Empire. She is mixed blood, a daughter of colonization. She is a mother to one son. She dropped out from a master's program in somatic psychology to relearn and reclaim indigenous knowledge from both her Toltec ancestors and the sacred Inca Quero path that she was initiated into Peru in 2005. She walks and serves as a medicine woman. Thank you so much, Marilu, for being here with us today. The first question that I have for you, what is the difference between learning Indigenous medicine for personal healing work and being genuinely called to become a wisdom or medicine keeper?
Hmm. Um, well, I just want to echo the last sister that was sharing, right? It's very important that we don't assume roles that we are not prepared for, especially in the West, right? I see a lot of people assuming roles, even calling themselves shamans, when that is a sacred title that very few people can even master to that level. I will never call myself a shaman, never. So, one thing again is to learn those practices for personal healing work, for personal growth, but to actually make a living or walk a path is not something that happens overnight. And I feel that in the States, it's such a fast paced fast food culture that people assume that just by going into a yoga, excuse me, shamanic certification that, they teach you for 6 months, and most of those teachings are online, that they acquire the body of knowledge that this path is. So this is a path that you walk. It's not a path that you acquire. It's not a path that comes in a box called a certification. It's a walk. And that walk begins long before you even are called into the path. And to actually, to be very honest, you are chosen. The reason why you are chosen is because as much as you can provide a lot of healing to people and empowerment, it's not an easy path to walk, right? So a lot of times I find myself having to dig very deep into my own healing work because, again, this is not some beautiful path the way it has been packaged or the way it has been presented in, especially in America, right? So you see a lot of that where people are not only charging but offering modalities that are very ancient when they don't have the skills, where they don't have the depth of knowledge and understanding of those traditions. So not only is that dangerous, but it's fundamentally wrong, right? So being able to differentiate between, okay, using those traditions and those healings for my own empowerment, for my own growth, it's another thing to call yourself amazing person, right? It's a completely different um, set of rules and experiences that you need to go through. And those are deep initiations that we go through in the path of medicine. Those initiations are, pretty intense sometimes. So again, just knowing when we need to be humble and step down. So that's what needs to happen, really, to step down, right? To take the time to take responsibility for how we continue to replicate colonization, especially the people in the dominant culture. You know, I want to be as gentle as possible, but the people in the dominant culture right now have the biggest responsibility to undo, to heal, to clear colonization, and to make reparations. Because if you are aware, if you're really on a path, you cannot unhear the call of this planet saying, this is enough. This is enough. We cannot perpetuate the same system of privilege, of colonization, where we take from oppressed people and then monetize, right? So that's my answer, sister. Thank you.
That is such a perfect answer that encompasses so many things. Thank you. So then why would you say it is important to do this decolonial work? I mean, you kind of touched on that, but and I love what you said is like, if you don't know that this is something that needs to be done right now, it's because you're not listening. And so then why would you say it's so important to do this?
Um, there's no system or there's no experience that is not connected to all.
Hmm.
Every is absolutely connected, interlinked, interweave. So you cannot begin to create a different timeline without addressing the main wounding, the main imprint that has created so much pain. And that imprint is called colonization. And again, it's not one event that happened 500 years ago. It's an event that keeps perpetuating and that it gets replicated by the way we choose to use our privilege and our voice, right? So that is the main imprint here. And again, because nothing is disconnected. That is the Western reductionist mind that likes to dissect, that likes to isolate, that likes to reduce things, right? And that created such paradigm of separation, of a mind that is busy with extracting, right? So colonization and extraction go hand in hand, right? So that is where we start, right? To know that in indigenous wisdom, in indigenous worldview and cosmovision, nothing happens in isolation. Nothing is independent from each other. Nothing exists removed from everything else. We are with, right? We are interconnected. So if you unconsciously perpetuate something that creates harm to others, you are perpetuating that harm not only to your own biology, to your own body, but also to the body of this planet, right? So that's why it's so important. Because again, in order for us to move forward, we need to be uncomfortable for a little bit. And I'm not saying it's going to be uncomfortable for a year. No, we are at the dawn, right? We are at the dawn of a new, probable, possible timeline, but that is going to require deep work. It's going to require being uncomfortable. It's going to require speaking up, even if we are shaking. It's going to require us, especially the people that are in the dominant culture. It's going to require for you to take the bigger part of this work. It's simple, right? It's simple. We are all responsible. Indeed, we all are responsible. But it's the people who hold the biggest privilege who can really affect and create the biggest impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. It's like we as women of color can only do so much. We need all of our other sisters and allies to step up and do this work. And what I'm hearing from you is that the true healing here won't take place until this is addressed.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So then this, so colonization has been happening for thousands of years. This oppression, the slavery, all, you know, killing, murdering, raping, pillaging countries, people over their beliefs, over their practices. Excuse me. How does how has cultural appropriation kind of replicated colonization and oppression? Like it's like the new form of it. Could you speak to that?
It's definitely the new form of it, right? The, I will speak from the live experience of what I do for a living, right? Because I work with indigenous medicine. And I see how perhaps maybe very unconscious, but people assume that because something like a cow is trendy, or the sweat lodge is trendy, or the yoga is trendy, that because of that, it gives them like an unspoken permission to take those practices, to make the, them their own, right? So colonization is, again, is that mindset of take as you please, colonize as you please. And so now when you apply that to the quote unquote wellness industry, a spiritual industry, right? And you see people again who have really very superficial, very limited understanding of those deep bodies of knowledge, deep cosmovisions that have been kept for hundreds of years, most of those, right? Those are not something that have been here for 50 years, right? It's not something that just happened or was discovered. A lot of those teachings and traditions are very old. And so when we learn from a very superficial viewpoint, without really, again, digging deep into the whole body of knowledge, we replicate colonization because, again, colonization is that quick, fast, take what is there because we have that scarcity mindset, right? And so when you then bring that mindset into the wellness industry, right? You can call it, I don't know, goddess, cacao, uh, yoga, whatever, right? And so many, so much of that.
Yeah.
You do the same. You replicate, and so it's a blueprint. It's a blueprint that we are here trying to unlearn. And I'm not saying that I am a gatekeeper of those traditions, but I'm saying that you need to take the time, right? It's not gonna happen in a year. You need to take the time it takes to steepen and to deepen then your awareness and your embodiment of those bodies of knowledge that again are ancient. They're not something that you can learn in a year.
Yeah. Wow, sister, thank you so much. I really appreciate your answers and all these wisdoms. And yeah, that was really
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Wow.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we're going to move on to the next speaker, and it is Mariah Makalapua. Sister, let me find you here. If you want to unmute yourself. Ah, there you are.
Hi.
Allow to mouse open. There you are. 1 second. Yeah. All right. Mariah Makalapua. Let me see here.
Makalapua.
Makalapua. Thank you for correcting me there. Okay, let me see. I think I have your intro here. Okay. Actually, I don't think that I have an intro for you. So I would love if you would just introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and your lineage and whatever you like to speak to for an intro.
Okay, sure. So yeah, hi everyone, such an honor to be here. Thanks for having me. And my name's Makalapua. Pua for short is fine. And let's see in a nutshell. Okay, I'm Kanaka Maoli and Chamorro and some other things on my dad's lineage. And on my mom's side, I'm Cherokee and French and some other things on my mom's side. I'm on Chinook land here, aka Portland, Oregon. And I have a business or an offering really called Medicine Collective. Y'all probably know me from the internet. And I have a space here. I've been kind of a little bit moving off of online and working more in our community and a lot more grassroots, hands-on kind of stuff over the last couple of years. And we in my space are a collective of practitioners working in the healing fields. Yeah, what else? Yeah, I work primarily with plants, people, and fungi to just do my best to lift up the part of my web that I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that intro. Sorry that I didn't have one ready for you.
Right.
Okay, so yes, I've been following you for a while and I've always admired your work and your powerful presence that you hold. I really love what you're saying about this grassroots work and about how you're tapping more into that instead of this like virtual online presence, but really doing the work within your own community. What has that looked like for you? Like what empowered you into this shift? And what are ways that other people can start to tap into this work too, like into this grassroots work? Like what can that look like for us?
Okay. Yeah, good question. I mean, to be completely honest here, I just am so burnt out on Instagram and the internet and like all of it. And I really wanted to like be more with my kids and my house and the land around me and growing food, growing medicine, and doing the social justice work that I've always been a part of, all of the activist work that has been kind of enmeshed with healing for me personally, but also just like in my larger community, you know, like these are our neighbors, these are our planet at large begins with my little home and the people around me, which is animals, water, all of the things that are living around me. And I wanted to be more involved and see how that looked if the internet goes down, basically, you know, like what do we really have? What are we really offering? And how are we really showing up? And I felt like I was just so much on the internet and like my heart just isn't in e-courses and online stuff like that. It just kind of is like feels draining for me. I wanted to keep my hands really dirty and in the growing of medicines and community. So that's my investment in the last few years more than before. And what that looks like for me is kind of like what we talk about when we're doing healing work in general, where we start with ourselves, you know, and your practice, it's a walk that you do for yourself, your family. And I think that that's sort of something that flows into the community around you too. And you start looking around and you see that whether you're in a city or out in the country, wherever you are, there's a lot of work to be done. And so you kind of say like, how can I show up there? And I've just been finding my way to answering that question in my authentic way, in the things that I'm the best at, which is listening, doing healing work with people, and working with medicines like plants and fungi, and making sure that there's an offering and an accessibility. Of course, like these kinds of things are just so duh to us, you know, like your community needs it, you offer it. So I love that we're having this conversation, because some of these things aren't that obvious, you know. There's people out there who don't even have sliding scales, and I'm just like, really? How do you sleep at night? What do you mean you don't have a sliding scale? So, you know, those are the kinds of things we look at when we're talking about being really there for our community, and not burning ourselves out, like showing up authentically and giving the most that we can, and still being solid in our care for ourselves and our families, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I love that. You're right. This isn't just like obvious work for everyone. Some people, this is completely new and even triggering, and they have no idea what to do with it. So yeah, thank you for speaking to that, because it's very true. So you love to work with plants, and especially fungi you've been getting into in the past couple of years, like you mentioned. And I'm curious if you're open to speaking on what is happening with the psychedelic movement and the psychedelic community right now, working towards decriminalization or legalization. And I just want to speak to really quickly, people might not know the difference between the two. Legalizing is like what's happened in a lot of states with cannabis, where it becomes legal and there's these certain protocols and licenses that everyone has to get. Millions of dollars, investors, all that. And then there's decriminalization, where it just basically makes it not a crime to possess or grow or whatever that looks like, through the legislation with that plant. And so what do you think about the legalization or decriminalization of psychedelics? Do you think that this is another for-profit move happening by corporations, the pharmaceutical industry, to profit off of this plant or these fungi? What are your thoughts around that?
I'm really praying that it's not going to be, and we're doing our best to kind of like push from the inside out in a lot of those realms here in Multnomah County and in Oregon in general. So for those of you who don't know, in Oregon, we just decriminalized we had Measure 109 and Measure 110 that just decriminalized the use of all. One of them decriminalizes the use of all substances, and the other one decriminalizes the use of psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine for therapeutic use, which, you know, of course, will include those who have the funds to be able to be the therapeutic practitioners of such medicine. The Western medicine's appointed practitioners and therapists of sacred medicines, sacred sacraments like mushrooms, and the settings in which that they are applied. So yeah, I've gone up and down with my views on it. I thought, keep them away, keep the law and their hands off of all of this stuff. Like, we will keep it underground. We've been fine doing it that way. But then, what I hear the medicine, as those of us who've been touched by any plant medicine, and I don't mean just like the mind expanding kind, but like any kind, these plants have energies and they work to help us grow, heal, expand. And so I think of my brothers and sisters who are in an urban environment who don't have access to those kinds of things, and how inaccessible it is to anyone unless they are like in the know of the indigenous ceremony that's going to happen. And then it's like, cost aside, it's like a knowledge gap sometimes. And so I think there's a lot of people missing out on heart medicine. And so it's kind of like, as in the middle of thinking of where do I stand with all this, right? Is legalized, or it's been decriminalized. And so it's like, okay, now we need to decide what we're gonna do. And so basically where I stand with it is that it's happened. I think that the best way forward at this point is to be living examples of how to show up. We are not going to take anything back and change the reality that we are in right now. So what we can do the most is make sure it's accessible, especially to people from where it came, that we continue to amplify the truths about the protocols, the medicine. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to sit there and listen to John Hopkins like playlist stuff. Like there's just stuff that there are people that have been doing this for thousands of years, and we can go back and educate and educate ourselves, educate others, and know about this, because we're opening energetic portals. There's so much to be aware of and so much to be careful about as we're opening up this entire thing to our humans around here. And there's also still people, there's still people in jail for things like this. There's still like a lot of suffering. So all of that is going on as well. And one of the great things I think that of it being decriminalized is that there's more accessibility, because there's less risk involved for people who are like, I'm not trying to go to jail, for this. So there's more openness to access there. And then in terms of all of the people like exploiting it, like that's going on, but we need to do our best to make sure that we are being very loud and clear about where we stand with our medicine and with medicine paths in general. And we aren't going to be able to stop everybody, but we can make sure that our voices are heard, and we can make sure that we provide safer places with access, financial and just safety in general, right? Like emotional safety, to be in places to access that medicine. And that's, I think, the best we can do right now. And so that is what we are doing here.
Yes, yes. Thank you, sister. That's so powerful. And I agree. Living by example is the number one way to walk, Flipping the switch a little bit to more of your personal experience here. And we only have about another minute or two. So you're a mama to two beautiful girls. One's 18 and the other is 9. You've been a mama, like you said, for half your life now, and I'm sure that's a big part of your identity. What is it like being a mother of color, raising 2 girls in a colonized world? How do you explain or speak to them about the importance of maintaining your cultural roots in a gentrified world?
Wow. Well, I've been growing. So I was 17 when I got pregnant with my oldest daughter. And obviously I've done a lot of growing since I was a teenager. And I think it's been an ongoing dialogue of remaining intact, and as much as we can, continuing to honor our traditions every day with little ways, big ways, and that they always know that their ancestors are a part of our home and a part of our walk. And I'm a big believer in bringing kids to ceremony and letting them learn and be around that, be learning songs, be in the practice of what we have that heals us, that nourishes our spirit. So they're right there alongside me.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. I agree. I love, being in ceremony and seeing all the kids running around and coming in, going, doing their thing. It's the sweetest. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, sister, so much for your words and these answers. It's truly an honor to be here with you. Let me see.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, for sure. We're going to move on to the next speaker, Jenelyse. Sister, are you here?
Shay, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Oh, you just, 1 second. I have to find you in here. Oh, there you are. Okay. So, hi. Oh, wonderful. Okay, let me introduce you. Jenelyse is an Afro-Indigenous femme herbalist, Indigenous reclamation teacher and advocate, land steward, and founder of an online BBPI POC Herbal Academy. She is a practitioner of the Ewe Ewe from her Yoruba lineage and a student for life. Jenelyse has a bachelor's of science in alternative medicine and other trainings and certifications on herbalism and permaculture. Thank you so much, Jenelyse, for being here. We recently collaborated on another workshop here through Raising Vibes called Decolonizing Herbalism, which was so powerful. And we got such great feedback from that. And yeah, so thank you again for being here with us for that. I want to start by asking you more about your experience. So what has your experience as a Black woman of color growing up in this colonized world been? We've heard from a couple different sisters, and I would just love to hear your perspective.
Yes, I didn't plan anything because I wanted everything to be as raw and organic as possible. Honestly, I feel like one aspect of being an Afro-Indigenous person is that there's just so much going on in the world, being specifically on stolen land and having roots and ties to the motherland, and also having ties to other places that we recognize are not healed and whole, and that don't necessarily recognize our medicine or our role and importance in the world. We have so much of our culture, our food, our medicines, our songs, our style, our rhythm, our dance, our hair. Everything is just completely appropriated and stolen in so many ways from various other peoples. And so I think that a lot of times what happens is that we're taught to be something outside of ourselves while we watch other people glorify or benefit off of what is innately ours. And so I think that, you know, as a woman of color, as a Black Afro-Indigenous woman on stolen lands, I've just been in situations where it's been hard to even really know where my alliances are, or what I should be doing, or where, you know, I should be. So I feel that, you know, as a woman of color on this land, there's just been, you know, it's difficult being on stolen land. I feel like I want to go home, you know? And I think that a lot of times as a woman of color, we get kind of looked at as, you know, if you don't feel comfortable here, if you're not feeling welcome here, if you can't move the way you want to move, if you're feeling oppressed, then you should go home, right? A lot of people have brought that up. And just the other day, I was gardening with a woman who's Dutch descent. And she asked me, well, have you ever been to Africa? And it's like, well, I don't have go back to Africa money. And none of us really have. And going back to Africa, going back home has meant so many different things for different people. So you want to go in a good way, in a right way, and you want to know yourself. You know, my people in my family have been back to Africa. And it's been for very serious things, I should say, that I don't feel aligned to do the way that they've gone back and done it and learned the culture and seen the culture. Whereas for me, it's more so from a heart space, from a learning, humble space of wanting to crawl back into the womb that I came from and just be there. So I think that that's one thing that has just been really challenging, and I'm sure for a lot of us, is how do we get back home? How do we get back home in a way that is, you know, respectful and real and authentic, and do it in a way that's going to honor our ancestors, because we've worked so hard to be here all the same and to survive here on this stolen land all the same. So I think that, you know, a lot of times we feel very torn between, you know, just in the heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I love how you shared with me on another occasion too, how you, with a mentor, are looking into buying land in Africa. Yeah, that's really amazing. I love that. Could you share maybe around where you're thinking? And is that where your roots are from, or is this a new area?
This is Ghana. I'm Cameroonian, Sierra Leonean, Nigerian. Nigeria is very dangerous. Cameroon is very dangerous. I've even spoken to a lot of people who are my allies and elders and have been advised not to look to those various areas. So one thing that's very difficult about relocating to Africa is that you have very few places that, you know, is really just gonna just work right off the back. So places like Tanzania is really wonderful for us. Places like Kenya can be good. Ethiopia is up in upheaval at this moment. So Sashimani, which is the land that a lot of Rastas went and settled to, is just like being uprooted from them, places that have been promised to them by, you know, some of our leaders and people who we consider to be of the highest of high, declaring particular places of land for us to go back home to, you know, it's very difficult to even to do that.
Yeah.
But so anyways, this land is in Ghana and it is with a beautiful mentor, someone trusted, and it's in somewhat of a rural area. I'm really excited. The mentor is going to go look at the land on Sunday.
Wow.
And I know, and so I'm raising money. So if anyone would like to contribute, you can. But this is something that is really powerful for me to do, some serious deep medicine. So either way, it's going to manifest, excuse me, it's going to manifest itself. But yes, definitely I can put my Venmo in the chat if you want.
Yes,
to
please.
donate. Yes, thank you.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm like so supporting you and holding that prayer and helping you hold that vision, because I too trust that this will happen in divine timing. Thank you. Okay, now switching gears a little bit. You mentioned, so I asked you about your experience as a Black Afro-Indigenous woman of color here. Now getting a little bit more specific, as an herbalist in this, health and wellness industry, what has this looked like for you? I know when we've talked personally, you've mentioned the tokenization that's happened, people having to hit their quotas or look diverse in the pictures and all of that. And, there's so many herbalists nowadays. I mean, at least in some areas, right? Like this is really booming and becoming more saturated of an industry. And so what has this looked like for you within your own field?
So, we are herbs, right? That's kind of how the Yoruba tradition addresses it, which is why when we go home to Africa, those people, if you have it, you have it, but we have it. And so they hand it back to you. As long as you honor them, respect them, and respect the elders, and the lineage and the traditions, and they hand that medicine back to you. And you know what, like I said, I am a child of Osan Yin. And so that is just my Odu. And I believe that with that being said, there is just innate droplets of mysticism and power within individuals who just hear the calling. Like I told you before, is that in the Cameroonian tradition, a lot of times people, yes, you are born into the ability to be an herbalist, to practice medicine. It is something that you were given as a 12-year-old, child who is, a virgin, who's going to likely remain a virgin. So there is a lot of power in the ability to even work with the herbs. It's something that is seeded into your lineage a long time. So one thing that I think that we as Afro-Indigenous people, again, on this stolen land have, and many of you do too on the call have, is the fact that we've had to be resilient over time. We've had to use plant medicines because, of course, everyone knows how, to work with the plants. There's plants that are nourishing. There's plants that are going to be nutritive. That's food. So first looking at plant medicines as food and looking at food as medicine, it has allowed for people within the village, mothers and and aunties and everyone to know and have an understanding and overstanding of how to use these plants. But to really be that practitioner, to be that medicine person, is something that is really within you. And so as I was mentioning, going back, is that in Cameroon, a beautiful woman said that you can be that person born into that lineage when you're that person, but you can also be that person through the spirit of being reborn or awakened, or using these medicines, like the sister said, that just opens you up and allows for you to know what you're doing and have that that connection to be affirmed. And so the affirmation within the practice, to be an herbalist, to practice with ancient traditions, is something that has to happen, obviously, otherwise you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. But one aspect of what I do and believe firmly is that the more of us who understand the way that these plants communicate, the more we seed into the world that we want, and then their system topples because we are no longer buying into their pharmaceutical industry, their monopolies of mass destruction and manipulation, all these various organizations that try to enslave the medicine as they've done. You know, I always say they've gone from, it just dawned on me, I always say they've gone from having slaves to having animals and enslaving those animals in those bins and such, but then to also enslaving all of these aspects. So controlling and manipulating and putting in bondage the things that are innately a part of our survival: food, medicine, land. You know, everything is completely controlled. So there's a grid. And so as soon as we break that apart and start being the people who are growing our own medicine, who understand the language of the Ewe, who know the songs of their ancestors, who are keeping the altars and are listening to their Odu and fulfilling their life purpose, then the more we are, you know, like I said, we are in a loving space, and we are creating the new world that we know exists and has been before.
Wow. Jenelyse, that's so powerful. Thank you for making that connection. You know, I really feel that, and I appreciate you sharing that download. Wow. Thank you so much, sister, for your time, for your words, for your experiences being shared here. I love you so much.
I love you too.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to Myranda. You're here. Yay. Let me see. Hi, Myranda.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Pardon?
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Yes, I can hear you. Okay. Yes. Okay. Let me go ahead and introduce you. Myranda is a holy guardian and guide. She resides in Ute, Arapaho, and Oketi Sawokin territories, or Elizabeth, Colorado, where she has a ranch and community center. She is Oglala Lakota through her maternal line and Scandinavian through her paternal line. Her work focuses on guiding traditional medicine, ancestral healing, underworld or shadow work, and ancient mystery teachings and modalities. Thank you so much for being here, Myranda. We talked about a few topics briefly over messages, and the first thing I want to ask you about are the new age constructs that are infiltrating and weaving their way through ancient traditional ceremonies, customs, and practices. You mentioned that this really took off in the 80s when people began melding together different traditions to create hybrids. Could you explain a little bit more about how this began and how it's evolved over the few past decades?
Yeah, well, I think the New Age movement really started evolving in the era of the love and peace and psychedelic times through the late 60s and into the 70s. During that time, many North American indigenous tribes could not practice their traditions until the late 70s. And so what happened is, once that was granted by government control factors, then there was this bleed in of let's colonize into these ceremonial practices that we're able to see, we're able to experience. And what happened was this hybrid kind of space of where we were taking technology that was very ancient, and then it was used or utilized in a more of a new age spectrum. It was used more in self-help. So you saw that in the 80s, where it was less community and more about self-manifestation, a selfish mentality. And then there became these different offshoots of what was called traditional, which really was a hybrid of new age mentality with some of the ceremonies that were just viewed, or there were some people that claimed themselves as even elders, or people that were of high stature in some of the tribes, where then it became, oh, let me give you this information. And then what happened really was like this flood of all these mixes of different practices that were coming together, but not in the good way, because it was mimicking, in a sense. It was mimicking what was viewed as an initiation or a ceremony, and then utilized in a way that was brought in with another technique.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for giving us a little bit of background on that. I appreciate it. And like the historical facts and data around that. So I really love how you encourage others to tap into their own ancestry traditions. Like, yes, these, Native American or many different lineages and customs and traditions and ceremonies and all of this is wonderful. But I really love that you encourage people to tap into their own history, their own ancestry. And I always have people ask me, how can they begin to do this work? How can they tap into their own industry or their own ancestry, maybe even within their industry too? I'd love for you to expand on that.
Well, I think that part is vital. I think we need to be understanding and reclaiming our ancestry. I think we need to understand what has happened in positive and negative ways within our ancestral pieces, no matter where you're from. And I also think that it helps us to reconnect with the ceremony of not only our ancestral ceremonies, but also to take responsibility for some of the things that maybe have been not so good in ancestry as well over time. How did we, or how did our ancestors or parts of our ancestry also contribute to the predatory control, domination, colonization? I think that's important to take responsibility. And then I think it is also vital to go back into those deep traditions. If you go back far enough, you'll find the traditions are full of the elemental medicine. No matter where on the earth you are at, they're full of elemental medicine, the spirit in all things, being one with each other and the community, and speaking to all elements and the spirit. So I think that's vital in our work. I think that should be, in a way, required for everyone to go into and really understand. And I know that there are ways, we're doing that with DNA testing, all of that, but you can also do that without the DNA testing, going into your family tree, charting all of that. I often, and we talked about this as well, I often also get questions about, those that are adopted. Well, there's different ways to go into this work. Not all the work has to be physical and in that physical realm too. A lot of that work happens on the other side of the fourth dimension. And, a lot of our programming is thought to just be in this space of whatever's in the physical or in the physical DNA. But we have a lot of spiritual DNA, of this etheric DNA, junk DNA that runs through us, and that we can find out more about the spirit and activating and communicating with the spirits of our ancestors, that energy of our ancestors. And I think that's so important to be connecting to that independently in our work. I also think that that's important we do that before we start to do any sort of practice outside of our ancestry. You know, what can our medicine be? That's what I continue to speak on, is like, what is your medicine? What is your ancestral medicine before going in and co-opting other traditions?
Yeah, thank you. I know this is a question that I get all the time, because I like to speak to this too, you know, really encouraging and empowering people. Tap into your own self. Start asking your grandparents, start asking your parents, you know, if that's accessible to you. And I often get people asking me questions, well, like, I don't know. And especially like you're speaking to, like, on the other side, in the other dimensions, how we can tap into this in the spirit world. People always ask me, what are rituals that I can do? What are things that I can do? Like, what's a physical thing that people, if you mind sharing, that people could do to start to tap into themselves? Let's say someone's adopted, or, you know, they don't connect with their parents or grandparents at all. Could you give us an example of one way that people could begin to do this work?
Yeah, the New Age construct has made things very difficult, where it is very simple when you can just close your eyes and you can ask. It really is that simple. Our ancestors are running through our blood. Our ancestors are here, and all we have to do is close our eyes and really bring in that reverence for that moment and allow. And I think that's the thing, is like, we think we have to have all the bells and whistles and things like that, but the ceremony is you. When you're able to tap into that space, you are connected with the spirit in all things. And so when you close your eyes and you're able to go into that space and say, ancestors, can you help me? Can you show me what I need to see inside of my blood, inside of my being, inside of my DNA, also within my medicine? You know, that's important. But I also think, you know, there's a fine line in that space as well, where we have to, you know, you see some people say, oh, well, my great-great-grandmother said I'm this, or we're that. I think before identifying with a specific culture or a race or what that may be, you need to do the physical work. And so then that may include DNA testing and things like that. But I think it's very simple. It doesn't have to be like drawn out. It's just asking and then understanding, you know, believing and listening to the ancestors. We tend to go into those realms and say, oh, what do I need? What can show me what I am? All this. It's like, also, can we go into those spaces and say, ancestors, what do I need to do to help you? What do I need to do to learn?
Yeah, that's really powerful, Myranda. Thank you. You know, it goes both ways. Like you're saying, it's not just me, my prayers, this, that, but it's, yeah, how can I support you? How can I offer to you? How can I feed you, nourish you, which is really nourishing ourselves. Wow, thank you. So from your post on Instagram, your Boundless Warrior, I can feel, like I really can feel your authenticity and integrity radiating from your being. I know we have never met, but I can feel that you're passionate about this work. This isn't a weekend workshop like you mentioned to me that you attend once a year. This is a way of life for you. I'm curious what words of encouragement you have for people on their spiritual path who wish to walk with integrity, authenticity, discipline, and accountability. And if you could maybe even speak to a few of those different points.
Well, I think it goes hand in hand with what Marilu and some other people were speaking about, is discipline and devoting the time, having the patience, not being even not being influenced by outside forces, and also to really hone in to one practice or your practice or medicine, and then really let that come forward. Like, let that nourish that, grow it. Also, I do think it's important to be working with elders and teachers and mentors that are trusted within these areas of study. And I do believe that it is important to fully devote your time. And it's not like the weekend warrior. We need to dissolve that. That is a big piece of the spiritual elitism and colonization that is happening within spirituality. It's not about weekend wars. It's not about certifications. It's a way of life. Like, there is no separation from physical and spiritual when you walk this path in integrity. It's one. It's always one. You wake up, you go to sleep, and you're 24/7. 24/7. So it isn't, I think that integrity comes also when we walk our talk. You know, we can't just say, oh, we do this on the weekend and then we're out, you know, being an asshole on, you know, other days. We have to be like very much, excuse my language, I tend to lose it in some ways, but we have to be able to take accountability for that and also walk our talk. And so I think that there's so much under that, and really coming into that, slowing the process down, being in the simplicity, less of the competition and more of like coming in and saying, who am I? Like, what is this about? Why am I doing this? You know, and what can I do? And this is the big piece. What can I do for others? How can I be in service? How can I be in service? Because the days of the selfish spirituality coming to an end, I'm seeing to it, you know, because we can't continue to work that way. We have to work for our communities. We have to do what we can. So if your spirituality doesn't align with the community and service, then you go figure it out.
Yes, sister. I will hold that vision with you too. That's really powerful that we all start to walk our talk, especially if we're talking a lot. You know, that's a lot, requires a lot of walking. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. This is really important. I so appreciate your time and your presence here.
Thank you all for coming on here and bringing your voices.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next up we have Sister Alexandra Carelli. Let me find you here.
I'm here.
Again, the seance, I see you, or I hear you, but I don't see you. Ah, there you are. Okay.
Somewhere.
Ah, beautiful. Okay. Alexandra Marie Carelli, dear sister, let me pull up your
me. I'm gonna pretend it's just me and you having a conversation so I don't get nervous.
Okay, we can pretend, block everyone else out. Alexandra Marie Carelli is a healer and artist living in Usotoma, Nevada City, California. She draws on her Mediterranean lineage through studying the healing traditions of Italy and Greece with Alessandra Belloni and her metaphysical initiation into an ancient mystery cult. Her work draws on meditation, dream work, past life regression, ancestral healing, ritual, and psychedelic plant medicine. She is the founder of Moon Mountain, co-founder of Sacred Lands Native Hands, and a current graduate student studying for a master's in marriage and family therapy. Oh, Alex, it means so much to have you here. This decolonization work came into my awareness in early 2018. And in September 2018, you put together, I believe, your second or third Moon Mountain gathering right outside of Nevada City, California. And you accepted me to be one of your facilitators. I flew from Colorado to attend this gathering, and it was the first space I ever entered where this type of work was being done. It was so healing for me to listen to women of color speaking on these topics I had so many questions about. You made time for a circle at the end where all of the women of color sat in the inner circle and our white allies sat in the outer circle, surrounding us and holding us as we shared our stories of women of color growing up in a colonized world. So many heartbreaking stories were shared and so many tears were shed. I want to say thank you for this opportunity more than anything before we begin. So, yeah, I really appreciate that. Now it is evident that you're the only white person on this panel. And I definitely chose you because of this connection that we've had for so long, and because I really feel like we resonate on a lot of these topics. And so I would love to hear what your experience as a white woman in a decolonizing world has been like. Can you explain? And then also, like, first, maybe your experiences, and then tap into what we talked about, the difference between decolonization and deprogramming work.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you for sharing that story about Moon Mountain. And yeah, I had some things planned that I want to say, but I'm just going to stay present with what's happening. So I think that the first truth for me in being a white person, in particularly in these types of conversations and in this culture that we're co-creating together, is that it's been so important for me to listen and to show up with full presence and with full respect, and to really listen, and not just listen like with my ears and be able to regurgitate like the right words so that I can say the right thing. Because I'll tell you right now, in these conversations, and I've been in them for years now, I've said the wrong thing more times than I can count. I've been canceled, I've been called out, I've been this, I've been that, I've been on all sides of the story, and it hasn't been easy to be able to show up in these conversations. And I would say more than anything, it's been messy and complicated and uncomfortable. But I think the reason why I'm still here and still having the conversation is because it comes from a place of authenticity inside myself and a real deep desire to listen on all levels, and a real dedication in myself to reclaim my own ancestry too. Like this desire for healing in myself, and seeing the way in which whiteness, the construct of whiteness, also took something away from myself and my people and my family. So yeah, it comes from that. I feel like the most important thing is that ability to listen and to keep listening even when it gets really hard, and that ability to allow ourselves to deconstruct. A couple people at the beginning echoed that sentiment of being able to like take the statue off the altar that you learn over time actually doesn't belong to you, or you know, you don't really understand what it represents. So it's this process of deconstruction that I think is really important in showing up in these spaces as a white person. I think that's all I'll say about that.
Awesome. Thank you. That was perfect. I really appreciate you sharing your experience. Now let's get into the decolonization versus deprogramming.
Yeah, okay. This is something that I love to talk about. I'm like lighting up even thinking about it. So I've been doing like sort of direct decolonizing work here in Nevada City, Ustama, by working with the indigenous tribe here, the Nishnan, and also through starting a nonprofit called Sacred Lands Native Hands with my friend who's Miwok. And I see decolonization work, and of course, there is a myriad of definitions now, and we each kind of even have our own definition in our heart of what it is and what it looks like for an individual. But I see decolonization as something that is really specific to, how do I even say it? It's like specific to reclamation of land and culture in the context of indigeneity. And for white people, it looks a bit different, where we can't exactly like decolonizing isn't exactly something that we can do on like a physical, spiritual, mental, emotional level. Like we can support projects that are decolonization projects, we can support land back, we can support tribes, we can support indigenous people. But the process that we as white people need to go through is more of a deprogramming and understanding that inside of us are the colonizer. We have internalized that, and it's a process of unpacking and learning what that means and how that is expressed. Somebody in the chat I saw said, like, how do we take responsibility for predatory lineages? And the way that I think about that is there's a way in which that predatory lineage, there's a way in which that colonizer culture is expressing itself through our behavior that is patterned and programmed today. So, for example, if my Italian ancestors, which, yeah, my great-grandparents are from Rome, like, who knows how far back into the Roman Empire my lineage goes. Christopher Columbus was Italian, like, that's who started all of this stuff, you know? So if there are ancestors of mine that were stealing, raping, pillaging pirates, then there's probably part of me that is still acting out those behaviors in some way, even if it's on a micro level. So it's my responsibility to understand how and when those behaviors and those patterns and those programs are running themselves and causing me to harm others in my life, in my community, or even myself. So this intergenerational, I don't even want to call it like an intergenerational trauma, it's like an intergenerational program of being the colonizer. It has to stop with the person who takes responsibility through changing the program in themselves.
Wow. Yeah, when we talked about this, it was like really like eye-opening for me. And I love like the logical aspect of it. Like I can be pretty like an intellectual and logical about things. And I love like you differentiating between the two. And it's almost like what I'm hearing, that decolonization work, other than, on a physical, like supporting this work, decolonization work is more for Indigenous people, people of color, BIPOC, and then the deprogramming work is more for white people, for people who come from these lineages who've traditionally been the colonizers. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I would say that anyone can deprogram. Like, I don't think that
yes, true.
own that term, by any stretch of the
Yes.
imagination. I think that we all at this point are running different programs from the dominant, like, colonizing culture. Maybe not all, but many people are running that. So yeah, I think there's space for anyone to deprogram it. But yeah, I see specifically in this conversation of like, can white people decolonize, or should white people use the word decolonization? And yeah, I feel like not really, like, unless you're speaking specifically about decolonization work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, within this conversation. Thank you for that clarity. I would love to hear about your European lineage and ancestry. How did you first begin to tap into your into pre-Christian rituals and mythology? Tell us about also, that, and then you mentioned the frame drum that you've been working with. So yeah, what has your experience been like tapping back into your ancestry?
Yeah, this is something that I really love to explore. So how did I begin to tap into my ancestry? That's a really good question. I feel like it was actually something along the lines of what Myranda said, of like, I just sat down and closed my eyes and began to ask questions. A lot of it for me came through like past life memories or ancestral memories, however you think about it. And just remembering little bits and pieces over time as I did my own healing work. And I think that first and foremost, any ancestral memory that I have now has come as a result and a gift of me doing healing work on myself. And it's like I go through a level of healing and like it's like I'm gifted like a memory or a piece or an ancestor's name or another skill or another ritual. So I think Myranda maybe also said it, that at a certain point it's like the physical and the spiritual become completely wound up into one, and there's no differentiating between them. And I have found that process of ancestral reclamation to be very much that. And a lot of the ancestral reclamation I have done has been in the metaphysical realms, has been in the spiritual realms, and asking, listening, remembering, and then finding teachers. So this is something that when we think about cultural appropriation, like one of the things that I was thinking as who was talking, I think it was Marilu, that cultural appropriation is a blueprint, and we can't create a new timeline without addressing the cultural appropriation and the colonization that has happened. And I think that that's very true. If we want to reclaim our ancestry, and at least I have found for myself, if I want to reclaim my ancestry, I can't fill up that space with a bunch of other traditions from other people's cultures and have my altar all like filled up with all of these things that I don't really even understand, in my walls filled with things that I don't understand, in my head filled with concepts and words that I don't actually understand. And I can't do all of that and then expect to be able to sit down quietly outside at a rock, let's say, and I can't expect to be able to receive information because there's too much like clutter that's filling up my spiritual space, basically. So there's because of colonization, because there is this like original wound of colonization that we are all suffering from regardless of our culture at this point, there's a vacancy that sometimes exists within white people, specifically white people who are not connected to their European ancestry at all. Maybe you're like, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th generation here. There's a vacancy and there's an emptiness around the spirituality and the connection to tradition. And so we try to fill it. Like we want, that hole is uncomfortable, the space is uncomfortable, the unknown is uncomfortable. So we try and fill it with other people's traditions because that's the program. Take, fill this empty void. And I think a question that I had posed when we were chatting about this was, what would it feel like if we could approach life or approach spirituality with a cup that was full of our own traditions? And the only way that we get there is through allowing the space to be empty for a little while and allowing that discomfort, that uncomfortability to be there for a little while. And I know that in my personal process, that's what it took. It took saying, no, I'm not going to culturally appropriate. I'm not going to keep doing these things. I'm not going to like go to 20 more ayahuasca ceremonies because that's what everyone's doing. And like, it's supposed to be the way that I become spiritual. Like, I'm not going to keep doing that. I'm just going to stop and I'm just going to listen. And I'm going to allow the space to be filled up with my own memories from my own bones and my own blood because I trust that it's there.
Wow. Wow. Yes, that's it. Yeah. I love what you said about that vacant space. It just makes sense. If you understand how energy works and you believe this, it is. And it's like that program that keeps looping and looping and looping until we stop it and do that work. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And then I want to hear about the frame drum.
Oh, right. The frame drum. So, I currently study with a teacher, Alessandra Bologna, who's from Italy. And I found her because I'm trying to think of exactly how it happened. The whole thing, whenever I'm finding a new practice, it really is like this funny little spiritual thing. It's not typically like, okay, now I'm going to become a frame drummer, so this is what I'm going to do. It's like, there's like little like pieces that I follow and try and pick up the thread of consciousness. So I don't remember what the original thread was, but at some point I stumbled across, I think, this book called When the Women Were Drummers. And something led me to that book. And so I picked up this book by this woman named Lane Redmond, who is a white woman. And she spent years of her life journeying through the Mediterranean region and through Europe, finding all of the figurines and the paintings and any illustration of women with frame drums. And it was found that there are these statues and these representations all over the Mediterranean and all over Europe. And we would play the frame drum not with a like paddle or a mallet, but we play the frame drum with our hands. And this was done in ritual, in community celebration, in community healing, all over that part of the world, and into Egypt, which is obviously part of the Mediterranean region, and where some of the culture that we now know to be like what is going on in Italy actually was like journeyed up from there. And so the frame drum is an absolutely beautiful, powerful tool that we have access to as European descendants, that connects us to our culture. And it's what is used to go into a trance state, to be able to enter healing spaces, you know, even just for yourself. Not saying to like go and start doing shamanic rituals on anyone, but just for yourself, to be able to use that drum to induce your own trance, to be able to call forth those memories and call forth those vibrations from our spirit and from the other side, from the unseen. So that's a tool that I love. I'm still studying. I'm still not very good. I'm not going to be playing it for you yet, but I'm still studying with Alessandra, and hopefully I'll get to go back home. That was a sentiment that was echoed a few times in this conversation too. I'm hoping to be able to go back home with her this summer on a retreat. I've never been to Europe before. And I think probably my favorite part of the frame drum story is a story I heard from Alessandra, which is that the tarantella, which is an Italian ritual, it's called the spider dance, and it's used when any woman in Italian culture at some point like goes insane. So she'll say like, I'm going crazy, there's something wrong with me, like I have it, I have the sickness, da 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 da. And they'll get together and they'll play this rhythm called the tarantella, and it has a rhythm and a dance, and the woman spends 3 days like writhing on the floor, like getting this sickness out of her. And it's a tradition that still exists today. It hasn't gone anywhere, it hasn't been eradicated, and there's aspects of this ritual that are actually performed every single year in front of a giant Christian church in southern Italy. And this has been preserved and thrived all through the now like 2,000 years of colonization. So if you start digging like our European culture, it's not, our earth-based wisdom, like it's not gone, it's still here. We just have to actually like be open to seeing it.
Yeah, it's like there's some work involved, like we've said, you know, it's on a physical level, like the digging and the files and the paperwork and the birth certificates. And you know, I know that I'm so grateful my sister got to actually tap into that. She was trying to get a European Union passport, I believe. She's now living in Amsterdam. And so she had to do a lot of digging because our family comes from the border of Italy and Switzerland. And I think my grandfather was like technically born in Italy, but his birth certificate, or it's like from Switzerland because that was the nearest hospital or something. And so, you know, she's gone back and like done that digging to really try and like find where that comes from. So there is like that very physical level of it. And then there's a spiritual level, like you've so beautifully spoken about. And I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I think the fact of the matter is it's a lot easier to culturally appropriate. And that's why people do it. But it's like the easy way is not the way. Like, it's just not. Like, yeah, it's because eventually there's going to be some stickiness and there's going to be some resistance, and it's not going to be as easy as it felt initially. So there's a way that is like the path of least resistance that's also in alignment with your soul and in integrity with your purpose. So yeah.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, sister. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I actually, well, let me close this up. So we have Richie and Xochitl who are supposed to be joining us. And please, if you're here, take yourself off mute so that I can find you. But I also know that they were traveling. And so they were going to be just barely making it. Or are you here?
You can change Jessica. Give Auntie Jessica the computer.
Okay, I don't know if that was, let me see. Richie and Xochitl, if you're here, please take yourself off mute. I don't know if that who just took themselves off mute was them or not. It sounded like maybe not, but let me see here. I'm gonna check my messages. Thank you for your patience. Okay. I know that they were traveling and we were gonna have them be the last speakers so that they had time to get to where they were going, I believe to Arizona. So maybe we'll just do some Q&As, and if they're able to hop on, they can, and then we'll go proceed with their questions. And if not, we're just gonna have to continue these panels because I am like so charged from hearing all of these stories. It's really, really beautiful. Okay, so this is an open Q&A. If anyone has any more questions, please bring them into the chats. I have been trying to look, and I feel like we've touched on most of the questions that were, oh, okay, here's one. For those who are mixed with the blood of the colonizers and the blood of the indigenous peoples, is it both? Are we doing both the work of the deprogramming and also the work of tapping into our ancestry, and are we also feeling that ancestral trauma from our ancestry? So sisters, if there's any of you who would like to answer this question, I invite you to take yourself off of mute and go ahead and answer. Really touching on mixed blood here.
I can answer to that one because I'm pretty 50-50.
Yes.
So in that, I think that it is very important because we are the colonized and we are the colonizer, but we also have to understand that we have to be the ones that break the cycle and we mend that piece. So I think that it is important to be in respect for that deprogramming process that has to happen. And I think within healing the ancestry within my father, my paternal line, because he had died when I was younger, because my mother and him had gotten divorced, I didn't have as much connection with him. I didn't have as much identity with that side of me. And it's a process. So it took me like 10 years to really understand, to track everything, to know where that tree led. And then also coming into realization that there were some not so good things. Like I had a great grandfather that was a 33-degree Mason, Scottish Rite Mason. And finding out these things and instead of like pushing it under the carpet, we have to go, whoa, wait, what? Okay, so, and I think somebody was touching on this, like, that's some of that epigenetics that's coming in too. If you think about it, what's been imposed on our DNA, also we need to be the ones that heal that aspect. So because it is very beautiful to go into our traditions. Like I could go into some of the Old Norse traditions and just be in that, relish in that, right? And I have. But I also needed to take that responsibility of what has happened within the modern ancestors, within ancestors after them. Then on my maternal side, my mother was part of the Rosebud babies. So she was taken from the reservation from the Catholic Church. So I have deep trauma within that as well. And I'm just giving you this framework because it is on both sides of the spectrum. So then I had to bring in the healing and the cycles of reclaiming what was taken from her and that lineage. So it's double the work, I think, but it's double necessary because if we just focus on, I utterly love and appreciate my paternal line and everything that, all the medicine and healing I've come in from that. But I also recognize the shit that went down, you know, and I recognized what was painful in that. And same with in my maternal line and what I had to do to reclaim that. So long answer for a very long question, you know, like we could spend hours on this. And I think it needs to be talked about more, is that there is double healing that's happening when you are within that colonized and colonizer kind of space, but also breaking the cycles too. So the cycles of trauma on both sides.
Wow, yeah, that's really, really important. Thank you, sister, for speaking to that. I really appreciate it.
Melissa?
Yes.
You know, I even want to touch on that too, just in the sense of being a Black woman and also having a lot of various lineages and ancestors present as well, and having that be lost, a lot of, you know, our wisdom lost over time through slavery. And also the burning of our records and the complete purposeful, what's the word? Abolishment of our identity as Black African people, not just African American or Native American, but African, Native, and then being mixed so much in that regard, and having to hold the presence, like the sister Myranda said, to heal from the various people who did the various things. You know, a lot of Black people gained their freedom, African people gained their freedom post-slavery because of being children of the colonizers and having that privilege. I often joke around just to bring light to it, because it is something that hurts us. You know, the house niggas from the field niggas, and what that has done to, you know, to our people over time. If you look into the Black community, you know, there's major colorism. There's so many people who bleach their skin to be something outside of what they are because of what has been oppressively placed on their identity, from our hair to everything. And so I think that, you know, I said I agree too, because that definitely is something that needs to happen within ourselves, is the deprogramming as African people to not just say we are African Americans, but to really claim Africa, because that has been completely demonized by the oppressors in regards of even wanting to go home to Africa, even wanting to seed back into the land that is ours, because of the oppressive outlook and representation of the primitive skills, primitive lifestyles, primitive and indigenous medicine and spirituality and being as being something other than what it is, which is sacred. And so that is something that we completely have, you know, has been completely taken and burned, literally burned, those records and our identities in that regard too. And from that point, like the sister said too, it's important for us to also to take those moments of meditation and to return home, because innately, you know, it doesn't matter where you are, there's a whole national thing that happens within Africa. But more importantly, anytime you're talking to someone from the motherland, you are African. You know, there isn't a, oh, you're from here or you're from there, or you need to know because this and that and that. That's just the home. So all the borders and things like that is coming from those the Belgium or Europe, or the great scramble of dividing those nations and all such. So I just wanted to touch on that too.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you, sister, for sharing your perspective too. I appreciate that. Wow. Okay. So I actually had a question that I wanted to throw out there. It's more of a political based question. And of course that I have a bachelor's in political science from Colorado State. And so I look at this, you know, through my woman of color lens. And I also look at this work through that political scientist lens as well. Oftentimes we see that this work is, or at least the media really helps portray this, but that this is a partisan issue. It's, or, you know, I guess it's like one side. It's the Democratic liberal side is all about this work, and then the Republican side is against, you know, is racist and is perpetuating that trauma in that program. So I think that this is, you know, it's the people, it's not the parties. And so to me, what I've seen in the past is some people talk about this as being like a victim mentality and really pinning. So like people who are Republican are choosing to maybe not look at this work because, you know, other leaders have said, like, this isn't it. And so they just kind of follow along and like, you know, it's wrong, and, or whatever those opinions may be about this. But I hope you can kind of understand what I'm talking about, how this is also like racism has become a political issue. And really behind that, it's the blaming and the victim mentality. So I would love to ask if any of you have any thoughts around when people say it's, you know, people are just being victims trying to do this anti-racism work, that, you know, we, how can I put this better into words? I should have written the question out. But basically, how, like, what's the difference here between like deprogramming and owning these traumas within ourselves? And then what is the difference with that between victim mentality? And how do we, as Indigenous people of color, step away from the victim mentality and use this as empowerment? So if there's any of you who would like to speak to that, I would love to hear your thoughts.
I'll jump in. Before that, I just wanted to touch on something I saw directed at me that I couldn't address when I was talking earlier. And it asked like where I got my yoga education or my knowledge. And this will kind of segue. My first response was the assimilation response, which was, shit, do I have enough certifications? Can I prove that I have learned enough yoga to teach yoga? And then I kind of took in all these words from all of y'all that are so powerful and so healing to listen to. And I remembered my yogic knowledge comes from my home, the mantras and the chants my mother sang to me as I fell asleep, the bhakti yoga of learning about these deities as I grew up, the philosophy and the understanding of yoga, which is a soulful thing. It's not a cerebral thing, which is a very Western take on everything. And I think even politics is this very cerebral place where it's about out debating, out ideologizing, that's not a word, but intellectualizing personal concepts so that they can be kind of pandered and sold in this bipartisan paradigm of this versus this otherization. Super, super harmful to tell folks that by addressing their trauma, they're victimizing themselves. It's very much in that kind of colonized mindset. It's actually super brave to talk about systems in place that are hurting you and to try to heal them as a community. I think the issue with a lot of folks who want to stay in the status quo is that process scares them. Facing trauma, facing wounding and healing it is a difficult path to walk. And I think that's why we stay in the status quo. And to be a victim is to kind of sit in it maybe and to wallow in it, but to be someone who speaks to systemic racism, to speak to these large issues that affect us on an individual level is brave. And so sounds like gaslighting to me. And that's what I have to say about that. Thank you.
Yes, sister, thank you. I appreciate that. If anybody else wants to add on to that, I would love to hear your words.
I do, just briefly, because I think that, you know, after the abolishment of slavery, a lot of European people were given land, right? Whereas a lot of African people became sharecroppers and were pushed off of land as they continued to vote and declare fair wages and declare to be looked at as real people, and obviously not just an asset or as worse as cattle and all these various things. And so from that point to today, what has transpired is a lot of people who didn't move, like my family moved during the Great Migration from the South to the North for work and to avoid being lynched, killed, and to live in poverty, to avoid poverty. We moved to the northern areas. And so from from that place, you know, things have evolved. People have become more educated, or so to speak. Opportunities have been laid out for some folks and not for others. And so what we have to realize in terms of the differentiation between victimization and then owning what has happened, and then stepping into a place of enlightenment and readiness, and the ability to succeed, or what that looks like, or accomplish a goal, whatever that looks like, right? Depending on who you are and where you're coming from and what you have access to. What people have to remember, which is what they did back then, which was, oh, you'll get your 40 acres and a mule. Lies, you know, the lies that were told, the same lies that were told to Native people about being able to have this particular sacred site, their land, or what have you, and then being further pushed off because of whatever you know, legislative lies and lobbyists and whatever, who else was involved, because that's been going on for a very long time. But recognizing that a lot of these particular people are people, as I was just writing about, actually have experienced so much oppression and sadness and trauma to even get to a point of being able to operate in the world that we see today. It takes so much healing and support, having been completely severed from support, even when we've tried to and done, even when we've literally done things like Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is have our own communities, our own banks, our own everything. That whole speech that Langston Hughes talks about, which is in regards to us being able to own land or be living on land just like the white people have done, and then having been told to pull ourselves up from our own bootstraps when everything was taken away and completely severed, like our language, our customs, and all of these various things. So we have to really hold a space of compassion for those people and spill over into those communities, and to go to those communities and talk to those people, and ultimately to support our family members, no matter who you are, brown, black, what have you, even white, because, you know, there's so many white people who have been oppressed and who have been in oppressive situations. We have to just remember that having that compassion and then offering an opportunity to step up and to come into that place is more important than even looking at whether or not they're identifying themselves as a victim or not, or whether, you know, because as soon as we step into that, because white people love to step into that arena, and lots of non-Black people or non-POC love to step into that arena, especially about Black people. But if you haven't been to the ghetto, if you haven't heard those mothers' stories, if you don't know what those mothers have access to in their communities, or the oppression or the trauma that has happened in their lineage over time, how can we just tell somebody that they need to get on up and find themselves in a better light when so many things have happened to those people, and the health, the wellness centers, the healthcare opportunities to heal are not there for them. Those clinics, those you know, alternative medical practitioners, they're not affordable for them, and they don't even know, because these systems have been in place to oppress them, to further seed themselves into their agenda of you know, oppression within the medical system and all such. So
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for speaking to that. I really appreciate it, Jenelyse. And yeah, just to wrap up, I'll share maybe a little bit of my views on this. And yeah, just to kind of go off of what you said, Jenelyse. What I see is people blaming each other. You know, it's this party or that party or here, there, whatever those groups are. It's everybody is just picking and blaming and arguing with each other when really here the corruption is coming from the system. It's coming from the roots of colonization. It's the elitist, and I don't even like to call them elitist because I don't view them as elite or superior to us, but it's the system. And if anything, I learned from studying political science and getting my degree, it's that the system is corrupt and flawed and designed to fail, especially with our checks and balances system not even being in place. This is no longer a democracy. And we're fooling ourselves to continue to think that we're going to fix it by continuing to perpetuate the system when the system was designed to not serve minorities in any way. And especially with recent things that have happened politically, it's very evident that that has completely, checks and balances have gone out the window entirely. And so now it's time to address those root issues. Why? Why are we here? How did we get here? And what do we actually need to untangle so that we can move forward in a good way? So with that, I want to wrap it up and just say thank you so much to everyone present here, to all of our panelists, to all of our participants. I'm so honored and deeply humbled to be here right now and to be holding this space. And I'm just going to be riding this wave for a while now. So yeah, thank you. And this will be recorded. I will send this out. I might just send this out to everybody just because I know there were some people who had to leave. So yeah, thank you again for your time. Lots of love and blessings. And please tune in because I'm going to keep doing this. There's so many other things. And if you have any feedback or suggestions on what else you would like us to talk about or to discuss, I know the next one may be based on cannabis and other plant medicines because that's the industry that I'm in through Raising Vibes and our farm. So yeah, stay tuned. Thank you so much to everybody. Lots of love.